Hard-hitting opinion and stimulating talk. The Bill Kelly Show. Weekdays from 9 till noon on AM900 CHML.
Pretty obvious there's been a big pushback about the government's idea to sell out part of Hydro One and a number of other things to try to raise revenue. And that's what Kathleen Wynne said that she was going to do to try to raise money for the transit systems that they want to put in place, both GO Transit and of course, municipal transit systems, including LRT here in Hamilton, but also for infrastructure needs. And for those that don't like this idea about selling off assets, government assets, well, where's the money going to come from? I mean, that's the question you got to ask yourself. If not that, then where it's going to come from? Well, there is a report that has been done for an organization that has been looking into this for the last little while. It's called the Civil Construction Alliance of Ontario Association, the RCCAO. And Professor Harry Kitchen has done a study for them, which indicates that there are other revenue sources and other ways that the government probably should be looking at to try to raise revenues for much-needed infrastructure vis-a-vis, of course, the roads and bridges, etc., but also for public transit. Pleased to welcome Professor Harry Kitchen, Professor Emeritus from Trent University, back to the Bill Kelly Show on CHML. Professor, thank you so much for the time. It's good to have you with us today.
Oh, you're welcome.
You've never been one to shy away from stirring the pot a little bit, and this report certainly seems to do that too, doesn't it?
According to some emails, yes.
You're certainly not surprised by that, are you, Harry?
I'm assuming I'm only hearing from the silent majority.
Exactly.
Or silent minority or something.
Somebody's ticked off about it anyway, as you might expect. But listen, this is not a brand new idea. I mean, this is something that governments have considered at one time, and they've always tended to shy away from it. You're suggesting in your report that this is probably the best time to do it. Talk to us about that.
Well, you're right. I mean, this is an idea that's been around for a number of years now. In fact, I've written about this, I think, over the last probably 10 years, 15 years.
At least, yeah.
At least, you're absolutely right. And a number of major government bodies and non-government bodies who've looked at this have also suggested this is the way to go. The reason that it's important now, there are a couple of things. It's pretty clear to me that there are problems with climate change is becoming a big issue. And there's no question that motor-driven and fuel-driven vehicles are having a negative impact on the climate. It's also the case that congestion is not getting any less in large metropolitan areas, and this is leading to a lot of costs in terms of lost economic activity. And there have been studies done by international organizations that said that the area around where you are, Greater Toronto Area and Hamilton, they're losing a lot of economic activity every year because of congestion and problems. And the other thing is that the gas tax, we got used to a higher price per gas in the past year, 2 or 3 years, and it's dropped a bit. And it seems to me now is an appropriate time to come back and say, you know what, let's properly introduce a gas tax, and let's use the revenues, earmark it specifically for public transit and roads. Don't throw it into the general fund, which is where it all goes now. The current gas tax the government collects just goes into general revenues, and it can be spent anywhere. And I'm clearly arguing that it should be into a dedicated fund. I think if you want to get public acceptability, and it won't be easy, by the way, but if you want to get public acceptability, you've got to put it into a specific fund and say, this is where it's going, and this is how it's being spent, and this is what it's being spent on, and make it very clear, and stick to it.
Why didn't they do this initially? Because the Premier did talk about this with remember her toolkit, I think is the phrase she used.
Yeah, that's right.
And these two things that you've talked about here, Harry, were both in that toolkit, and obviously they've decided not to go down that way.
Yeah, I don't know why. I mean, that's a political decision they made. I'm not sure. If you ask me, was it the right political decision? The answer is no. But that's what they did. And I'm just trying to push the envelope on and say, look, let's get going here and get moving on this. We've got to take some action. I mean, it's pretty clear that I don't think the government's got any hope that they're going to be able to raise enough revenues to balance the budget unless they do something like this. And it's what they have. They have choices. They can either go into general taxes, which are a good thing for certain services. They can cut expenditures. I doubt if we're going to see much success on that side. Or they can raise taxes where you can specifically identify the users. And the thing I like about this, it's essentially like a user fee. You use the service, you pay for the service. And if you put the funds into a specific fund, that money should be back to spent on that service you're using. And that's one of the reasons that I think it's important that we push on with this.
Let's talk about some of the recommendations and specifically we'll do the gas tax first. I'm going to talk about the tolling situation in a couple of minutes as well, because that's rather timely too because of the Pan Am games that are happening right now, and people are going crazy about road congestion as it is. But to the gas tax, and you're right. I guess about a year or so ago we were paying about $1.41, $1.42 a liter, I think, for gasoline.
That's right.
And it's down. I think it's about $1.19 now here in the Hamilton area. It's crept up rather in the last little while. But you're suggesting a rather significant increase, though, aren't you?
Yes, it is. It's close to 8 cents, up to 23 cents. And what I did to get that number, where did it come from? The gas tax was introduced was set at its current rate in 1992. And I took a look at the increase of the rate of inflation since 1992. Said, let's suppose we'd increase the gas tax each year by the rate of inflation as measured by the Consumer Price Index. And if you bump it, and if we had done that, we would have been in 2015 at 23 cents. The tax in BC at the moment is around 21 cents, I believe, by comparison. So this would say, okay, we're going to be 2 cents higher than BC. And in BC, by the way, they have what they call a carbon tax, which has actually turned out to be quite effective. The value of it is about, I believe at the moment, 6.67 cents per liter for motor fuel and 7.67 cents for diesel fuel. So it's not out of line with what they have. And the studies that have been done on the carbon tax in BC have actually been quite positive about it.
So now we're getting into the realm of politics and politicians making tough calls. And you've watched this long enough, Harry, to know that 9 times out of 10 politics and politicians and governments are going to take the path of least resistance. There was a lot of pushback when they talked about raising the gasoline tax. Yeah. But you talk about this being the proper time to do this because, as you mentioned, the price of gas is low. And you've got a government that's in power right now. I mean, it's not as if, they're going to make a decision here that's going to cost them their jobs. They're here for another 3.5 years.
Well, you're right. I mean, I think it's the time to move. I mean, it's interesting. If we go back and take a look at things like road tolls or raising the gas tax, I did a study back in 2008, which came out and made the same recommendations, but it was a much more comprehensive study. It covered other things. I redid the study, co-authored with an economist from the University of British Columbia in 2013. When I did the study in 2008, and I asked, and I saw it was suggesting people should pay for a service they use, like roads, either raise the gas tax or road tolls. I got absolutely hammered in newspaper articles, editorials, and everything. In 2013, the same papers that were taking me on, and the same people going after me, were coming out and supporting the same thing I had said 5 years earlier. And we did that. We took a look at the change in attitudes. There have been studies on, done how do people want to pay for driving roads. And there are companies and organizations that do these studies. And we cited them in the report in 2013. And you know what? There was quite a change in attitude in the Greater Toronto and Hamilton area. We were really surprised. More and more people were saying, you know what? We do have to pay for a service if we're using it. Get on with it. And I was really quite amazed. That was the big difference in a 5-year period. I couldn't get over how there had been such a change. And the people generally who buy into the change are the younger middle-aged people. It's the old guys like me that have a problem, generally.
Set in their ways, don't want to have anything new. And everybody, shudders when they talk about an increase in tax. What would it do, though? I mean, you've obviously crunched some numbers here, Harry, and say, okay, if you raise the tax by this much, is it also predicated on the number of people that are going to be driving? Because there's one mode of thinking that says, well, if you do that, people are going to leave their cars at home. That's going to reduce the revenue.
Yeah, well, I do. When I do these estimates, I used what economists tend to call an elasticity, which is, let me just use it in common language. I tried to measure the extent to which people change their behavior, their driving behavior, if the price goes up. To do that, I had to draw upon studies that have already been done where they've examined that, and the kind of range of studies in the U.S. and the very few that you would find in Canada suggests that for every 1% for every 10% increase in the price of gas, road usage will drop from between 6.7% to 12.3%. Those are the empirical studies, the ones that have actually gone out and tested. That's the range they use. So when I did these estimates, I built that range into the future. I said, okay, assuming it goes up, whatever percent, there's going to be a reduction. And I built that in. And so the revenue estimates include that reduction in road usage.
And by the way,
it's like anything. You can always quibble with the way it's estimated, but I took what was the best available information from the empirical literature out there and basically applied it.
But it's not so much into the hypothetical either, because, I mean, in the past when gasoline prices have spiked, we know that people have said, well, I'm not going to travel this summer. I'm not going to go. I was going to go to Nova Scotia, but no, we'll go to Ottawa or we'll stay home or whatever. They do make those decisions and have made them in the past.
Oh, no, there's evidence. I mean, the evidence is there. The question is, to what extent do they do it? Do they do it, but do they change it dramatically or not so dramatically? So I took the range. I took basically a range, and I did the average of the range, and I just applied that. And I've done it before. That's never been criticized or challenged before, so I don't know. I guess it's okay.
And you're also suggesting, though, that if, in fact, there is a reduction in the number of people that are on the roads, which is why you've also looked at embracing, this is one of the other things the report talks about a road toll. Now, did you mean an overall highway toll, or are you just talking about specifically the HOV lanes?
Well, you know what? Basically, you can do it. I mean, you can go to one extreme, which is the 407. Every lane is tolled as soon as you get on it. Okay, we pay a fee, and I use the 407, and every lane is tolled there. Or you can do what is done in some places in the States. What happens in the States is set up these high occupancy vehicle lanes, and you're familiar with them around on the Queen E, and
we've got some on the 403, some on the QE here.
Yeah, exactly. So, and they're not very heavily used, which is what amazes a lot of people. So what they've done in some places in the States, they said, you know what, we will toll those lanes. They call them, instead of high occupancy vehicle, HOV, they call them high occupancy toll, HOT. And basically they set up, I mean, you can have a little transponder in your car or whatever you can do. The technology's there to do this. And if you want to drive in that lane, you can drive in that lane by paying for it. And the price could vary depending on the level of congestion. It could be quite cheap sometime, or it could be more expensive. It depends what kind of tolling mechanism you want to use. There's a variety. However, what they've done is to say, let's just put a toll charge on those lanes. Now, that's the easiest thing to implement around, particularly around Hamilton and the Toronto area, because you've already got the HOV lane. The technology is pretty simple. You can put it in. Putting in a full tolling system is more complicated, more expensive, will take longer. And my view is that I think down the road, I don't think whether we like it or dislike it, it's going to be inevitable. We're probably going to have some form of tolling charge. Who knows when it's coming in. And my suggestion is that this increase in the fuel tax now is probably, at best, a short-run solution for this, because more and more cars are going to stop using motor fuel and diesel. Well, if you put a gas tax on a car, and the car is driving down the highway, and there's a car driving with electricity beside you, he's not paying for the road, you are. So you've got to change your technology, and you're going to have to get into some kind of mechanism where you're going to be able to charge all vehicles, and that's where you get into some kind of tolling charge. And it doesn't matter what kind of car you drive, you pay so much per kilometer.
You mentioned in the report, and I know that one of your kindred spirits, Andy Manahan, who actually was an advisor to Premier Wynne when they were trying to develop these policies, suggested this is the best time to do that because we've already got the HOV, the extended HOV lane set up right now. People are already used to the congestion that's going to be caused by this. You may as well do it now.
Well, in fact, some columnists have been saying the same thing. If you read the Toronto papers, some of them are saying the same thing. Look, we got these things in place. I mean, why are we going to get rid of them? Because we're only going to have to bring them back in a few years. Why don't we just keep on going? So, you're right. I mean, it's possible. It could be done.
Let me ask you something. And again, as somebody who's been involved in this element of about urban planning, but also the political realities that we're facing these days, is this something that the public at some point can accept? Is it a matter of selling it properly? Is it a matter of marketing, or are they just going to push back and say, "Don't do this," and governments will react accordingly?
Well, I mean, some people are just going to say no. I mean, there are lots of people who say
that's always going to happen, though.
We can't do it. I go back to the 5-year interval from 2008 to 2013. I was surprised at the change in attitudes towards paying for use of roads, which would include either higher taxes on gas and diesel or some kind of tolling charge. That a lot higher percentage of people who were surveyed in from the 2008 report to the 2013 were in favor of pricing. I mean, there was quite a dramatic change. So I think it's coming. And I think if you talk to a lot of the younger generation, they say, you know what, it just makes sense. And it's simple. You use a service, you pay for a service. I mean, that's all we're asking for, or all I'm suggesting here. I'm not suggesting that this service should be paid for by somebody who doesn't use it, which is the alternative, it seems to me. And, So if I pose two alternatives to most people, do you want this to be funded by every source of revenue, or do you want it to be funded by a specific source of revenue? You know what? I think most people would probably opt for the one saying, well, let's fund it by charging the people who use the service.
Well, I use the 407 as a comparable. Now, you know all the horror stories about the 407, and people swore up and down, we're never going to use that road, those SOBs that did this and sold us out, et cetera, and the fees into... now, I've had occasion to use it on a couple of times over the last little while. It's a busy highway.
Oh, I use it a lot. It's a very busy highway.
And so for all the people that said they're not going to use it, somebody's using it, because the few times I've been on there, there's a lot of traffic on that road. And I'm not just talking about during rush hour. I'm talking during off hours. And so obviously people are saying, you know what, it's a convenience for us. I'll pay for it. Well,
no, that's exactly right. And, the argument's often made, well, how much can you afford? Well, I mean, I use it too, and I use it quite a bit. And basically, you're absolutely right. I mean, people are obviously willing to pay for it because they're using it. And the use of the road seems to have gone up a lot in the last few years. Now, it's probably partially attributed to the congestion on 401 that's driven people there, but it certainly is used a lot.
So do you feel that that's transferable? That mindset is transferable to other highways too?
Well, you see, I think, I think it's coming. I mean, I think people are going to buy into the notion that we got to do something. I mean, quite frankly, particularly around the large metropolitan areas. And I mean, it's the Golden Horseshoe and the Greater Toronto area there, where there's a lot of congestion, and there's no question something's got to be done around there. I mean, I don't think you can continue. Particularly when you see all these estimates that are coming out on the lost economic activity because of congestion and crowded roads and all the rest. I mean, it's not going to help whatever manufacturing we have. I don't think it's going to help to keep it that way like it is.
They got to find the money someplace. It's going to be interesting to see what kind of feedback you get on this. If they start burning you in effigy, Harry, don't take it personally.
I'll move back. I grew up in the Hamilton area, so I'll move back.
Listen, this is great fodder for conversation, and it'd be interesting to see just how the governments are going to respond to this too. Thanks so much for this. I really appreciate the time again.
It was good. I enjoyed it. Thanks
Take care, Harry.
Good. I enjoyed it. Thanks
Take care, Harry.
Good. I enjoyed it.